Yes, welcome back. This is F a Rap Critic. I'm your boy Malik 16. And no, it's not Here Comes the White Sheet, it's Here Comes the White Shirt, all white. You can go cop this if you want. It's the I Used to Love Her shirt, which is available on theraproller.com. Go check that out. And if you have not already, go take a minute to like and subscribe to this channel. Rap Ruler, you can leave all your rankings for every album that we've ever reviewed on this channel, including the one we're talking about today, where we're still going over the classic album, 1994's The Diary by Scarface. This is category 2, where we go over the rap performance. And yeah, since this is a lot of folks' favorite album, I'm not going to waste any time. First dimension in category 2 is dimension 1, personality and charisma. This is not our first rodeo. We have now reached the third time ranking the work of one Mr. Brad Scarface Jordan, and some of those same things that we pointed out in our previous reviews of the Ghetto Boys album and the Untouchable album still remain true when we're talking about The Diary. It's the idea that there's not a lot of separation between Brad and Scarface because they are one and the same. On this album, Scarface is telling you his personal convictions, his personal doubts, and his personal aggressions that he's doubling down on. When we think about a track like Mind Playing Tricks on Me 94, he is going into the space of sharing what's up in his inner psyche, right? Like, he wants to end it all, but it's in direct conflict with his beliefs, and he's still not gonna trust the pastor enough. He's gonna rely on self and his personal relationship with God, but it doesn't change the fact that he's dealing with betrayal and not being able to trust, and that includes not trusting in himself. So he's giving you those moments of doubt, but still with a prideful shell around it, that he still trusts himself more than he trusts other people, and he trusts God more than everyone else. And that's something that remains true whether he's talking gangster or about women, right? Because even on the song Going Down, you know, he mentions how it's in him to be a dog. He can't understand why dudes cuff women and all this other stuff. He's telling you his personal outlook on multiple topics. Hand of the Dead Body is a whole mini dissertation on why he feels there's a contradicting message in what society aims at when it comes to conversation of violence. So you leave this album at least feeling like you know where Scarface stands on things. Now, there's other things he does to showcase personality, which we'll talk about as we go through the other dimensions. There's a weightiness, there is a gravitas to what he brings to his presence on the album. When he's menacing, you feel like, oh, this is where he's menacing. When he's contemplative, somber, doubtful, or even playful, you're getting at. You hear the kind of slick and humorous sides of him on the songs about women. You hear the menace on the aggressive songs. You hear the contemplation and the doubt on the more commentary-based songs. So all those things are something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats when you're thinking about the personality and charisma displayed on this album. All right, that takes us to dimension 2, the suspension of disbelief versus the believability. One thing about rap is that rappers don't do enough of a job of asking you to suspend your disbelief when they're going into the extreme territories of anything that's extreme. If there was a disclaimer, just imagine how hip-hop could be cited. You know, it's like at the end of a show or the beginning of a show where they're like, you know, this is all fictional. Any coincidence with real life events or people is pure, you know, out of our control. That would be a thing, just that simple thing. But it doesn't happen here. This is still the heyday of gangster rap. First getting called out on this stuff. Rap had been around long enough for gangster rap to have bloomed and boomed, and now being called out. But at the time, it was only being called out by folks perceived to be elders. So there's nothing here on this album that says, hey, I'm jumping into a character. This is Brad turning into Scarface. In fact, most of the lines on here really imply that they are one and the same. It's me. Brad is coming to get you. He uses his name every now and then he's repping his hood. I mentioned in the first video with Eric, shout out to Eric, that he's set claiming here. It may not be as obvious to folks outside of Houston, outside of Texas. South Acres is his set, and he reps it and he calls it a set. He says he's set tripping. He says that they bang. He says gang. He says that's why we listen to our OGs. And if you read Diary of a Madman, Scarface's autobiography, or any descriptions of his young life, his young adult life coming from his teens, he was out there wilding. He may not have been a drug kingpin or anything, but as far as like down to do some, physical aggression acts, he said he was out there. I think that's a point that has helped Scarface's rep, because he always has come off on these audio bodies of work as someone who will do what he's saying. And then when you get the context of the songs, No Tears and Jesse James being like part 1 and 2 of this same idea, motivated by the close killing of his friend and his friend's girlfriend, and them not knowing exactly who, but having an idea of who it might be, and the whole hood wanting to retaliate. There's so much validity and so much reality to that sentiment and that feeling. One thing Eric was saying in video 1 is that he related to it because he was thinking about homeboys that he lost. I think most of us growing up in the hood who's lost someone to violence, if you're not already a perpetrator of that violence, we all have that Trey Boys in the Hood moment where even the most noble or brightest future having and well-intentioned of us want to ride and get that. And you get to live that out through Scarface, which seemed like a cathartic exercise for him, letting it out instead of really doing it. But the intention was definitely there, if you choose to believe that. When it comes to the songs about women, it's somewhere in the middle of being, there's an obnoxiousness to it because it's still pimp laden, but he doesn't go far with the super pimped out imagery. He's limiting these descriptions to one scenario, so it makes it believable. He's not saying, all the women in the room were on me, or I opened up the door, there were 50 women waiting. He's like, hey, this is a get down that I'm setting up, me and my boy. And the other one is, this is me riding around in my car, and this is how a typical day would go with me picking up a woman. You got a man that's gone, I got a woman at home, I'm keeping it straight up with you, you still want to ride, this is how it goes. This is also what I'm going to do after the encounter. Those things don't seem far-fetched when you loop in the status symbols that the Scarface is mentioning are key points in his game. Hand of the Dead Body, you can use Scarface's career as the rollout for what he's talking about. He's like, look, by this point in my career and Ice Cube's career, here's what we do. Here's the flack that you're giving me. I'm a direct representative of what you're complaining about. Here's my defense. So yeah, nothing's coming from a character point. The only time he's really outside of the conversation is seeing a man die. He's more the observer there. But he tells you that. That is where you get a disclaimer. So the question always comes down to, how much do you believe Scarface, or how much does Scarface make us believe him on this album, on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats? That takes us to dimension 3, delivery and use of voice. The standout, of course, being Seen a Man Die, where he goes into that subdued preacher cadence. So not a hooting and hollering evangelical preacher, but almost someone doing a Southern eulogy, all right? And it has a definitive melody to it. And N.O. Joe said that from that point on became Scarface's calling card. People know him more for that pattern than anything else. And then throughout this album, if you look at any of the write-ups and reviews, people always talk about Scarface's natural up and down with how he sets up his verse structures. So even when he's not doing that preacher voice and preacher pattern that he did on that song, on his gangster songs, he's doing it, especially when they're more staccato. Jesse James, I thought they wrote it up in Dane, like Jesse James. It goes up, then it goes down. When we talk about tracks like Jesse James, His choices on there are different ways that he shows that he has a personality, because he's not afraid to deviate in his seriousness, still be animated, which is not an easy feat. He does things like when he goes on that third verse and says, and I'm gonna catch this mother case. Like, you can hear him gritting his teeth and stretching those syllables out to really make that point, but there's a humor to it. It's the way a comedian would do it on stage when he wants to emphasize that I'm angry. Later on, when he goes, buck, 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 and then he says it twice, buck, buck, buck. He didn't have to do that, but he wanted to use onomatopoeia to really act out what he's going to do. The way he uses his voice on Going Down to tell the simple story, he wants to show some slyness to himself. Slyness is probably a better descriptor than slickness. I don't know how slick that song is, because it's still kind of misogynistic, kind of like, you know, I got these women, look at her, I got this. He even says that. He said, and I got this. The way he says the B word is like, yeah, it's smug. Like I said, it dips into obnoxious territory, but there's a playful energy to the way he's bouncing on that. So it must be my lucky day. He's saying it's luck for him, but throughout the song, as the verses continue, you really see he's saying the woman's lucky to have found him as he's riding in his fancy car. And then, of course, singing that hook, which, you know, different reviews, I've seen some criticism of it as a takeaway, him choosing to do the red balloons, 99 Luft balloons interpolation for his hook, and choosing to do it himself, right? Please excuse my attitude. It's almost like, oh, I did this for reference, and I just decided not to give it to anybody else. I'm fine with it how it is. It's good enough. It's what I'm just leaving it like that. Forget it. When you rolling through my hood, tell me what you see. Like the hook on G's, the hook on One. There's some freedoms here that are taken with how voice is being used. There's a crispness on the song G's that you're not getting anywhere else on the album. So as clear as Seen a Man Die is, and its preacher tone and its weightiness in his voice, of how like heavy the thinking is and how heavy the material is. This is a weathered kind of voice. This is not a he's young, but his delivery betrays his age. You would have swore that Scarface had grown children at the time that he made that song. He sounds older than he is on Seen a Man Die. It's the opposite on G's. G's is where you hear a lot of the youth in Scarface. G's in the crispness of it and the clarity of it. Going Down, you hear the youth in just how sly and smug it is. So he's able to give you all these different things just from his inflections, his tone choices, and his decisions to say certain words certain ways. All that is something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats when you're thinking about the delivery and use of voice. Masterclass there. All right, that takes us to dimension 4, the flow. No matter what flow pocket Scarface is choosing to rap in, he's still doing that up and down thing. So that adds variety automatically when you couple those two elements together. On the title track, The Diary and the song G's, ironically the two most East Coast sounding songs, is where he flows with the most syllables. He flows the quickest and the clearest. And then on G's, he even does like a pickup flow where he says, killing don't make us no difference and dying don't make it no different. Choices, because he's already rapping at a higher tempo, and then just using that couplet there to do that little giddy up is showing some more dexterity than he shows on a track like One or a track like White Sheet. He's just, you know, doing that simple A, B, A, B. He's switching it up a little. He even goes off beat a couple times. Like it won't be long, you know. Scarface is a very in-pocket rapper, but you know, if he's rushing a line, it's gonna happen. Like how I felt Cube was on this song. Cube seemed like he was guiding his flow off of word association, which gave it a freestyle feel. He even doesn't end it on an even bar count. It seemed like he was trying to rhyme the "you ain't killing me" to land after he said Bill and Hillary, but it just didn't line up. But on the end of Mind Playing Tricks 94, Scarface just kind of rushed that last line. "Now I'm a goner, she's a loner." It comes in very hurried after the line right before that. Yeah, I do feel like the more aggressive Scarface gets in his delivery, the less flow is able to be implemented. He'll sacrifice fluidity for emphasizing the words that he wants, or the feeling that he wants to emphasize. So flow is there because it's such a short album. By the end of it, you feel like there's a showcase. You get 2 bouncy flow tracks, you get 2 more syllable packed and more seamless, and then you get the more raw, straightforward stuff. So you get some variety there. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 5, the wordplay and bar intent. Now Scarface, from this album, and maybe even before that, but from this album on a broader level, got that stamp of being somebody who was very intentional with what he put into his songs. And I think a lot of that comes from the songs that are popular. I don't know if when listening to this album, you think that there was a lot of intent, because when you hear those first 4 songs off the album, the amount of times that he's using the word MFer just sounds like I'm running out of stuff and I just want to be provocative. It sounds like there's a lot of lazy writing going on, or as I mentioned, the feeling was more important to emphasize than any like words. There's descriptiveness, and that's one of the things that Scarface is always credited for. So even on the first song, on White Sheet, in the first verse, the first couple lines, he's talking about that F-up vision like a sand shower. Like, he's coming to you with imagery that you're not getting in other places. He's talking about point blank at your head to the front till I knock out the back. So even in violence, he's giving you descriptive violence. But those are lines that come between a sea of just basic talk that anyone could say if they want, right? Just describing the caliber gun you're going to use to bust somebody down. I got that MF and chopper. It doesn't take a lot of thought to write that. And so knowing that the same man who can do that for 4 songs can also give you something that is very rare, especially hip-hop at the time, like where you're getting that level of description of things that are not tangible, things that we can't easily reference. There's no caliber to picturing what you see as you're exiting this life, and he's able to take that from beginning to end, the final moments of someone's existence. Not a lot of simile or metaphor. I mentioned onomatopoeia. Imagery is really the calling card here. Not too many rhetorical devices being used at all, and bar intent is up for debate. Wordplay is almost non-existent, but all these things are something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 6, the overall quotability, punchlines, or poetic wisdom. Look, this dimension was damn near modeled with Scarface as one of the poster children for the other half of it, which is the poetic wisdom aspect, because Scarface is not a wordplay or punchline type rapper by far. The closest you get is on the song G's with a line like, "Cause I done been to more wakes in this past year than the mother Bengals lost last year." It's the closest you get to a punchline. and that's him flexing, but it's violent flexing. It's kind of the penchant here. But poetic wisdom is what Scarface has come to be known by, especially in the second wave or the second half of his career. And it starts from songs like Seen a Man Die. Seen a Man Die, I can literally post the entire song on here, and you can understand how it's all poetic wisdom. The language used. Anybody can write a song about dying, but what Scarface did is take us into the physical, spiritual, and psychological elements of what it must feel like, not only as the person passing away, but as the observer, and without anything that obviously points that out. He doesn't even tell you who this person is. He hugs his father, and then from there on, it's just description of what it feels like and what it looks like at the same time. I mentioned this when I talked about songs on the Untouchable album, like Faith. Yeah, so I mean, that alone, we can end it, but it doesn't stop there, because on songs like Mind Playing Tricks 94, he does similar things. What the points that he makes about the conflict between how churches and the representatives of churches purport themselves, and what's going on that doesn't align with some of that, that's commentary right there. There's a simple line on there. He's like, I should go to my pastor, but he said he doesn't. He said, because they all be on this one street. So I take it on myself to thank him one deep, because they putting a price tag on a man's worth. And it's a fashion show, so the men flirt. The world is ending fast, so they try to make us switch fast. He's saying a lot, but saying a little. That idea of it's a fashion show, so they all flirt, directly followed by they try to make a switch because the world is ending fast. You know where Scarface stands on certain issues of what the church might do compared to what the Bible says. And so he's like, you know what? I'm better off just worshiping in my own way. And he ends that verse by saying, I follow no man because men be phony. All right. So yeah, poetic wisdom is there, even on the aggressive killing songs, the way he's describing the passion to get this person, right? You smoke my homie, now I'm getting you. That line about when I see your picture and my hands start shaking, it's like, oh, this is how much I want this done. This is how bad we've been hurt by this loss, and this retaliation is getting me. When you hear folks who have no business relating to any of those aggressive songs on this album talk, they usually credit Scarface for being able to tap into that descriptiveness as a part of his poetic wisdom. So there's a lot there to unpack and take apart if you really want to dissect it for that value. Now, I do think that's where Scarface shines, but that's all something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats when you're thinking about the overall quotability. Okay. He mentioned Swisher House. I wouldn't be surprised if, I know there was a common term in Texas, but I wouldn't be surprised if, because of this album's popularity, the label decided later on to name itself Swisher House. That's where we get Swisher House Records from. And Mike Jones. Who? Mike Jones? All right. Dimension 7, the concepts. Conceptually, this album has a few. Just the decision to make No Tears and Jesse James kind of like go into each other as like 1 and 2 unofficially is conceptual in the construction, right? And the sequencing. But as far as actual concept songs, again, Seeing a Man Die, even though it's in a story, most of the songs on this album are in the form of stories, right? So you can make a case that all the story songs are concepts, or all the concept songs are stories. But the nature of Seeing a Man Die is conceptual from the get green, like from jump. It wasn't going to be this straightforward story. It's more about this particular point in time. And because it had such an impact, and because it is the centerpiece of this album that everyone talks about, that seems to be a pretty important concept. So something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to the content. First, we'll start with 8, the externalized content. And what is Scarface talking about that is not just him himself? There's commentary that's going to be blended with his own feelings and standards on things. So Hand of the Dead Body is social commentary directly affecting him because he's a representative of what's getting backlash. So this is his response to the political and societal blaming rap violence instead of media violence. It's a very convenient excuse that's been passed down to other rappers and that Black people perpetuate in urban communities, just like the no snitching kind of standard, the unspoken rule or the very spoken rule by this point. And why we hold on so dearly to it, I don't know. This idea, this is all I know. I have no choice. This is what I see. This is where I come from. Yet this man could give us one of the deepest, most contemplative songs in music history. But this is all I know is 35 different ways to tell you how I'm going to bust your head open and end your life. So yeah, there's some contradiction there, but it doesn't stop him from having two verses full of making a case for his point of, if you're going to single one out, single them all. Single out Matt Dillon and single out David Duke and all this stuff. So that's the biggest social commentary. He slips it in on Mind Playing Tricks in that second verse, like I'm talking about, which is saying a lot. That whole verse is dedicated to, church is coming up fast. It seems like a quick cash grab. So I'm going to make this detour. It's a big statement. You're not hearing a lot of rappers talk about things like that, but Scarface has always talked about how important his Christianity is, despite being the face of gangster, over-the-top, hardcore type rap. Really interesting dichotomy in his life. Then that takes us to Dimension 9, the internalized content, which you get a lot of because he's interspersing that with his feelings and his views. On the song G's, he's telling you about how his hood has changed. We used to kick it with the rival gangs. Now we into these survival things. There's more tension in the hood. And he's like, while we're warring, if you come, while we're feuding into this hood, you're going to get got. Because there's the set tripping language there. There's this idea that he's repping that's something that's near and dear to him, even though it's violent in nature. One and going down, it's all about if you believe that's a typical day in the life of Scarface. He talks about wanting to end his life. The second verse of Mind Playing Tricks 94, he's like, I want to do this, but wait. A very vulnerable moment. You don't need a whole verse to go into the extent of that. You just know he's sharing that. So as much as he shares his gangster sentiments, as I mentioned, he shares those doubts. So it's there. There's not one particular song where it's like, oh, this is so much internal content. I learned so much. But by the end of the album, like I said, in the first dimension, you leave this album feeling like you know where he stands. These are all things to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats when you're thinking about the content externalized and the content internal. Takes us to the final dimension, Dimension 10, storytelling. All right, it's a very storytelling-based album and not super fantastic stories. Most of them depicting what Scarface wants us to believe is a day in his life, repping his hood, riding around his hood, and just being in the rap game. So many stories are on here. As we mentioned, most of the songs are told in a storytelling manner, from No Tears to Jesse James to One to Going Down. I mean, One is a whole song about setting up group sex for later. Hey, got this woman. Second verse, I call my homie. Look what I got. Come through. Third verse, by the end, they all naked in the hot tub. Interesting descriptions at some point in that third verse. It gets if you're into that, that's your thing. But group sex, yeah. So group sex, that's what it is. Yeah, but that's a story. Seeing a Man Die is a story from a different perspective, but it's a story. Mind's Playing Tricks 94 is a bunch of vignettes. Going Down is a story. That's like half the album right there. So the question is, how good are those stories? And that's something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. And with that concludes the category 2 breakdown and review of the classic album, which just turned 30 years old this year, The Diary by Scarface. And until next time, y'all know what it is. Join us for the next album review. Until then, F a Rap Critic. They talk about it while I live it. Word to meth.